Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're watching us from today. We sincerely apologize. We were supposed to do a live stream today, but we've had massive technical issues, and as a result of that, we just decided to record this. So this is gonna end up being a recorded video rather than a live stream. For those who are new here and those that will not be knowing what's happening, we have been on a 30 days, or rather we are on a 30 days intermittent fasting challenge, and we've been encouraging ourselves to feed within a given window, and then the rest of the window we are fasting. And on Monday I came along, so today is day 3. On Monday I came along and I talked about what is fasting in general, and then the second day I came along and talked about the different types of fasting. And today I will be talking about what happens to the bodies when we fast. And of course tomorrow a dear friend of mine will be coming along to talk about the preparation, what you need to prepare when you're doing fasting. For those who have continued to support us, we really appreciate that. Your liking, your subscribing and things like that go a long way to continue to encourage us to do what you're doing. And if you're considering, that would be nice if you can join the tribe if you haven't done that yet. See, as I've been doing, like as I mentioned, there are a couple of things I've continued to do during this season. I've continued to ensure that I'm hydrated, which is something I can't overemphasize. I've continued also to ensure that I'm journaling, so I'm putting down the things that are coming to my mind, the stuff that is just like kind of I can refer to back and kind of in a way remember this season from. The other thing I've been doing as well is to feed my mind, and I've been reading this book. And today I was reading, I'm just trying to read like 10 pages of the book every single day. So today I was reading this book, and I think it just spoke to me, something that I would love to start with today before I dig into what I want to talk about. And it was talking about the benefits of life of a purpose, just talking about a purposeful living. I was saying the identification and pursuit of your purpose will produce significant benefits. Here are just a few examples of the benefits to passionately pursuing your purpose. Understanding of purpose makes it less likely that you will abuse the people, situations, and things in your life. The word abuse is comprised of two words that have been put together to make up the word abuse. Abuse is comprised of the word abnormal and use. Abnormal plus use equals to abuse. Anytime the purpose of something or someone is not known, abuse at a minimum is likely, if not inevitable. Let's start with considering the abuse or misuse of things. The misuse of things has been the subject of many funny movie scenes. One scene that comes to mind is the Coke bottle scene from the classic movie The Gods Must Be Crazy. Against my better judgment, I will attempt to describe this scene, as I think it represents a great example of the concept of abuse. You can also view this 5-minute scene on YouTube by searching for The Gods Must Be Crazy Coke bottle scene. The scene opens with a pilot in a small private plane flying over a rural African bush community. The pilot drops an empty glass Coke bottle out of the plane window. This bottle hurtles down to the ground and almost hits the leader of the tribe in the head. He picks up the Coke bottle and brings it back to the tribe for all to see. The people of the tribe had no idea why the gods would send them such a thing. So they begin to look for ways to put the Coke bottle to good use. Initially, the villagers found many useful functions for the Coke bottle, like curing snake skin, making music, crushing seeds and nuts into mush, and cracking open coconuts. Every day, the people of the village found more ways to use the Coke bottle as a tool. However, while everyone was finding great ways to put the bottle to good use, there was a problem. There was only one bottle. For the first time in the history of the tribe, there was lack. For the first time, the villagers did not want to share with one another because they each had needs for the Coke bottle. New feelings of jealousy and anger emerged among the villagers. One day, two boys began to fight over the Coke bottle, and one boy snatched the bottle out of the hands of the other boy and cracked him over with it. Observing this altercation, the leader of the tribe had seen enough. He determined that the bottle they were better off before this gift from the gods appeared. So he takes the cork bottle and attempts to throw it into the air, expecting the gods will take it back. While this is a silly scene and quite humorous, it is a profound example of several important principles. Much like the cork bottle, which went from being a handy tool in the tribe to a source of strife and pain-causing weapon, if we do not understand the purpose of our lives, like the cork bottle, we will misuse it. And this looks like wasted time, underused talent, misdirected energy, misspent money, and dysfunctional relationships, among others. If I try to relate this story to our bodies, if you don't understand the function and the purpose of your body, it's very easy for you to be able to misuse it. We know that our bodies are a temple, our bodies are sacred, our bodies are the only medium we have to be able to operate while we live in this world. So if you're not taking good care of your body, or if you do not understand how important or the purpose of the body, you can easily end up abusing it. And so we can end up idolizing things like food. We become very acquainted and very much like kind of attached to food, that at the end of this all, we fail to have a healthy relationship with food, and that's where it becomes a problem. And one of the antidotes, one of the ways in which this can be solved, is by trying to disconnect from unhealthy relationship with food, by becoming kind of a master of your appetite, and in a way telling yourself, I am going to control when I'm able to eat and when I'm not going to be able to be eating. And that's where fasting comes in to help quite a lot as an important tool. And so after taking that out of the way, I'm just going to try and talk a little bit about what happens, because we know what is fasting and what happens to our bodies when we fast. The most important thing to realize is that when we eat our food is usually divided into two things. So we've got what are known as the macronutrients, which is something that we need in large quantities. So we've got the macros, and then we have the micronutrients. So as it suggested itself, so the macros are needed in large quantities, and the micros are needed in small quantities. So the micros include things like vitamins and minerals, whereas the macros are the fats. We have the fat, we have the protein, and of course we have the fat, the protein, and we have the carbohydrate. So these are some of those foods that we can actually consume in bigger quantities, and they are like the main constituents of our food. So when we are eating, what happens is that depending on what you have, your food can either be composed of fat, it can be composed of protein, or it can be composed of carbohydrate. We know that the building blocks of fat is basically the fatty acids. So you bring different fatty acids together, and these fatty acids, when you connect them together, they will give you one big molecule or macromolecule, which is called fat. When it comes to protein, the building block of protein is basically amino acids. So you have different amino acids. You've got 20 amino acids in nature, and when these amino acids come together, they build up together with these so-called peptide bonds, help them to connect together, and at the end of the day, you end up with these long chains of amino acids. If you just have those primary amino acids, that will give you the primary structure of the protein, but then there can be also the tertiary, the secondary, and the quaternary structure of the protein. And then of course you have the carbohydrate, which is basically like mainly the sugars. When you have only one sugar, we call that a monosaccharide. Mono just meaning one. So when one sugar is a monosaccharide, and then two sugars, and mainly the monosaccharides are the simple sugars. We have the glucose, we have the fructose, and we have the galactose. And then when you start to join those, and here I have a good example, a good illustration of just a glucose molecule. The blacks represent the carbon that is found in the glucose molecule. So when you have all those, the carbons, they are connected together with these what's so-called glycosidic bonds, and those bonds help to connect those carbons to these oxygens, and of course the other parts that we have are the hydrogen. So for a glucose molecule, we'll have 6 carbons, we'll have 6 oxygens, and 12 hydrogens. So when you have a simple, for example, simple sugar like glucose, which is of course obtained from, that's basically the carbohydrates, the single building block of carbohydrates, you can start to connect them together. If you have a glucose molecule, you connect it with another glucose molecule. If you have those two connecting molecules, they'll give you maltose. If you have a glucose molecule, you connect it with a galactose, you'll give you lactose, and that's the sugar that is present in milk. Or if you have a sugar molecule, a glucose molecule with a fructose molecule, that's going to give you the sucrose. So at the end of the day, when you have this, you're eating your food, what happens usually, you'll have this glucose. Normally, on the tongue of the human body, of course, if you have several connecting glucose molecules, they can give you what is called starch. When you start to eat starch, you're eating, like say, your bread, you're eating cassava, you're eating yam, you're eating whatever you're eating that has starch in it. It gets into the mouth, and of course, because starch has got what is called amylose and amylopectin. Amylose is just a linear chain, so you've got linear chains of glucose, but if they start to be broken, to be branched, you have the amylopectin. On our tongues, we have what is known as amylase, which is an enzyme that begins to break down those sugar molecules. It starts to break down the starch, and digestion begins, so that the food is made into a bolus, and that bolus is swallowed, and then you can start the other digestion of things like protein, etc. But one thing you need to realize is that when you are eating this food, it needs to be broken down into the different constituents in order for you to be able to benefit from that food. So here you can see, I hope you can still see, you have the glucose, which is going to be broken down through the process of glycolysis. And what's just going to happen is that glucose molecule can be broken into that fructose 1-biphosphate, and that can end up resulting in the production of DAHP, and the glycerol molecule 3-phosphate. And at the end of it all, those processes continue, and they will always produce what is called the ATP, and there's usually an interchange between the ATP, adenotriphosphate, and the diphosphate. There's that interchange between these two of them, and at the end of it all, at the bottom, you end up with pyruvate from the whole process. You can see that from here. So when you're eating, normally this is what is going to happen. You have your glucose, which of course is going to be broken down, which is of course from the carbohydrate that you ate. And once that is broken down, it starts to fuel the body, and it gives you the energy. If you've got the fat usually will be stored, and that's going to be like the triglycerides, which is the fat that flows around the body. And then when you have protein, of course, protein needs to be broken down into the peptides and some amino acids, which go into the small intestine. They cross over, and these can begin, they're absorbed into the body, and they can help you with being able to kind of function and have the various functioning in the body. But then what happens, that's when you're eating, isn't it? In the fade state, what happens is just you're having those amino acids from the protein, you're having that glucose, and of course at the end of it all, the glucose will help to power all the different organs in the body, which includes of course the brain, and of course you're going to have this production of glycogen, which occurs as a result of the breakdown of the glucose, and that glycogen becomes the fuel that will continue to fuel the different organs and the different parts of your body. But then when you're starting to fast, you're actually, what is happening is that you're hindering, or you're reducing that ingestion of the food. And once that happens, is that now the body it starts to sense like we are starving, something is happening to us, we are not having enough of what we need. So what happens is that the liver glycogen, which is of course the first store of energy, it will begin to be used. And of course that is the process which is called glyconeogenesis, which is just where the glucose in the liver is starting to be produced or synthesized from these non-carbohydrate sources. And so as this continues to happen, it's just continuing to ensure that you have appropriate blood glucose levels, so that at the end of the day, you are all kind of in a way continuing to ensure that all the mechanisms and all those processes that are needed in the human body and in the human blood is needed and at optimal levels, so that you end up avoiding what is called hypoglycemia, and that can actually result in death. And so also, because you're limiting glucose levels, the body wants to break down the carbohydrates, but there is nothing that is coming up because you're restricting yourself from eating. Remember, I talked about the fat as well. Fat, usually the body will love to store the fat. So what happens is that the body begins to go into those stored reserves in the cell, and then it starts to break down those fats into smaller constituents of those fatty acids, and that actually happens within the liver. And so once those fatty acids start to be broken down, they are converted into what are known as the ketone bodies through the process known as ketosis. And these ketone bodies are just produced from something that is known as the acetyl-CoA, and mainly they are found in the mitochondria of the liver. And what happens is that when the carbohydrates become scarce, this becomes the new way of the body breaking down those stored fatty acids, so that it has a new source of energy, fuel or energy. And this whole process is called ketosis or ketogenesis. So of course, ketogenesis does usually occur, mainly may or may not occur depending on the levels of carbohydrate that you still have restored or stored in the body. So for example, if you've got enough carbohydrates, your glucose of course is just going to continue with those oxidation processes, and once it continues with the oxidation processes, there's going to be the formation of this acetyl-CoA, and once this acetyl-CoA is formed, it's going to immediately be converted in this process into energy, and that means you're not going to go into ketogenesis. If you have excess carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which is just that kind of sugar in the body, this is going to be fully metabolized as normal and nothing is going to happen. But if you've got limited or no free carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, that means that these core acetyl A needs to kind of be activated to start to form these ketone bodies, and this becomes your new source of fuel for the body. And so what happens is that whenever you have those liver glycogen is first used as the energy, which takes about 10 hours for this liver glycogen to be kind of used up, and then after that about 16 hours the fasting of the body results in mobilizing of these fatty acids, and of course those ketone bodies begin to form. And of course what happens is that autophagy is promoted, and once autophagy is promoted, which begins again in the liver, when the liver glycogen is depleted, this can actually range depending on how long your fasting is going on. So if you're fasting for longer periods of time, you can end up having, let's say, approximately 16 hours thereabout. The autophagy starts to pick up, and then after that it starts to reduce for approximately 2 days. So if you want to kind of go into that so that you can tap into this energy, that's something again you need to figure out by yourself. There are so many different benefits, of course, when it comes to this autophagy. There are things like reduction in inflammation, improved immune system functions, there's slow down of things like aging process, there's the eating up of things like cancerous cells, and that can actually result in healing of the body. And of course, there are also these infectious particles and toxins that can actually be killed as a result of these body going into autophagy. Of course, there are so many different things I can continue to talk about. Of course, there is also the protein, which starts to be degraded into those amino acids, but the body will normally try to avoid degrading the protein. And at the end of it, what it does is that it kind of will prefer to use glucose if it's available, and if glucose, of course, remember that molecule, if it is available, what happens is it just starts to break down and those bonds are broken down. But if it's not available, of course, the body begins to look for alternative sources, and that can help you with fat, losing things like weight and things like that. But of course, this is just like a skimming through of all these processes, and it's something that you might want to look a little bit more into more details, because obviously I don't want this recording to be a long one, but just to show you a little bit like when you are in a fade versus a fasted state, what happens to your body, which fuel the body will prefer to use, and at the end of the day, when you are restricting that fuel, what happens to it, and at the end of it all, just kind of in a way understanding what happens to your body when you fast. And tomorrow, as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at something different. We'll be looking at preparing yourself for fasting. What are the things that you can do? And I'm excited and looking forward to a dear friend of mine doing this together with me. Until then, I shall see you. Bye-bye.